As day in the ancient capital dwindled, and the sun began to sink behind Rome's 7 hills, vendors packed up their market stalls, and courts adjourned for the day. The crowds in the forum slowly dispersed. Citizens made their way home from the baths and parks and porticos. Carts and cattle clatter away. The city's stones cool after the day's heat, and as the last of the sunlight glints from temple rooftops, the shadows below grow long. Many of Rome's ancient streets were narrow, high-walled and winding, so even while some colour still flushed the sky, ground level might quickly fill with umbral dusk. In those pooling twilight shades, statues lose their chiselled contours, shifting out of recognisable features into silhouettes. The great and mighty become indiscernible figures, standing still in the gathering darkness. And so too do the faces of people become indistinct. With night comes anonymity, and for some, this was a distinct advantage. A thief, in Latin, is fur, and the great Roman scholar Varro believed that this came from an early Latin word, furvus, meaning black. For, as he said, thieves steal most easily in the night, which is black. And so again we find ourselves in the confluence of darkness and the night. In the last episode, we called upon the goddess Trivia, the fearsome goddess of the crossroads, and we saw that her nocturnal world of Stygian darkness was a place where the dogs howled and black magic and the black arts proliferated. And among the dangers of the crossroads, at the peripheries of onward journeys, we glimpsed furtive figures flitting around the edges, thieves waiting in ambush, robbers ready to snatch a person's possessions and vanish into the night. In this episode, we'll explore their world and try to catch better sight of the shadowy blackness into which they disappeared. And since the Roman world had deities everywhere and in all facets of life, from the lofty to the low, it will come as no surprise by now to learn that here too, among the light fingers and swagger in the company of thieves, there dwelled a deity, a goddess, who presided over the domain of pilferers, liars, and loot. She's a difficult goddess to catch properly in our sights because the evidence we have for her is, as so often, fragmentary and scarce. But this is fitting in this particular case, and perhaps to be expected of a goddess who operates very literally in the shadows that is of day, of the city, and of life, and it might be supposed that a goddess whose concerns are fundamentally furtive and dishonest didn't have a cult that was openly and abundantly celebrated. So it is, she's suitably elusive. Nevertheless, we'll do what we've done before in these difficult cases and track her down by contextualizing her within her own domain and the place it held in Roman belief and practice and culture. And in the process, we will thereby wander into her covetous gaze. And there we may snatch glimpses of her, through the cracks and unlocked doors, in the heavy pockets of opportunism, and in the fading footfall disappearing down the alley and away with all your heirlooms. So, lock up your strong room, tie your money pouch tight, hold on to your hollyhocks, and let us enter the realm of Laverna. Laverna was a goddess of thieves, cheats, and ill-gained profits. With her, we are thrown into the underbelly of Roman society. We usually get a sense of her only by sideswipes when various authors use her name to throw shade on someone or their behaviour, like when the poet Horace is haranguing people for pretending to be pious in order to cover up their true impious desires. His point is that many people don't commit crimes only through fear of getting caught, not because they don't want to or aren't inclined to. And it's in this context we hear a whispered prayer to Laverna. Horace writes, "If a slave says to me, 'I've never stolen or run,' I reply, 'Then you've your reward. You've never been flogged.' 'I've never killed anyone.' 'Well, you'll not hang on a cross and feed crows.' 'I'm good and honest.' Well, a Sabine would shake his head in dissent. A wary wolf fears the trap, a hawk the hidden net, a pike the baited hook, and the good hate vice through love of virtue. But you commit no crimes for fear of punishment. If there's hope of concealment, you'll blur sacred and profane. If you steal one of my 1,000 bushels of beans, the loss is less for that reason, not your sin. This good man, admired in the forum or tribunal, when he offers a pig or ox to placate the gods, cries loud and clear, 'Father Janus and Apollo!' Then, just moving his lips, afraid to be heard, 'Lovely Laverna, let me escape. Let me seem just and pious, veil my sins in darkness and falsehoods in clouds.' How a miser who stoops at the crossroads to pick up a planted coin can be better or freer than a slave, I don't see." He's talking in those last lines about people stealing the coins other people have left as offerings to the deities at the crossroads, and how enslaved these penny-pinching thieves are to their own social and moral degradation. Now, this is satire, so you have to remember that the tone is overblown and scathing, but nevertheless, it's not admirable activity that he describes. And you'll have noticed the goddess Laverna embroiled in this ill behavior and hypocrisy. The poet targets the ostensibly good men who make a loud fuss about making their sacrifices and supplications to worthy and venerable Roman deities, but who give their true selves away by quietly murmuring their prayers to Laverna all the while, prayers which request that their true intentions be shrouded in an air of piety and integrity, and that their nefarious real activities go unseen and their lies go undetected. Now, there's something underhand even in the whispering of these prayers, because in the ancient world, prayers weren't usually an internal and private dialogue. If the gods were to hear what you had to say it out loud. Mumbled, whispered, and inaudible prayers were generally viewed with great suspicion. It meant that what you were requesting was either embarrassing, improper, or downright deviant, and that's why, while pretending to be pious, the so-called good men in Horace's poem cry loud and clear to the gods when they're being performatively good model citizens. But they keep their prayers to Laverna as inaudible and undetectable as possible. Quietly murmuring a prayer under your breath and barely moving your lips as you did so was a sure sign that there was something wrong with your prayer. Hence the saying from the Stoic philosopher Athenodorus, who said, "Know that thou art freed from all desires when thou hast reached such a point that thou prayest to God for nothing except what thou canst pray for openly." Commenting on this, Seneca wrote to his friend in a letter, "But how foolish men are now! They whisper the basest of prayers to heaven, but if anyone listens, they're silent at once. That which they are unwilling for men to know, they communicate to God. Do you not think then that some such wholesome advice as this could be given? Live among men as if God beheld you. Speak with God as if men were listening. So Seneca has a stoic, cosmic God in mind, the kind of impersonal, divine reason that ran a rational, pantheistic universe fueled by benevolent providence. But the thing about nefarious prayers is that there were nefarious divinities to answer them, and Laverna seems to have been one of those. Or at least the crowd she attracted grew a reputation for being no good. The Greeks had nothing like her. There was Hermes, Mercury in Rome, who was a divine trickster known for his cunning. He was a patron of travellers and commerce, and he was a psychopomp, meaning that he was a deity who guided the souls of the dead to the underworld. And out of these fiscal and underworld connections, for Greeks and Romans alike, he was also a patron of thieves. Indeed, he was a thief himself. One of Hermes' first acts as a baby was to escape his cradle and steal a herd of Apollo's finest cattle. And not only this, but he had the cunning to steal them by herding them backwards, thus reversing their hoof prints and covering up his tracks. So although a beloved deity, these kinds of qualities naturally attracted thieves to his worship. But this was only one small facet of his much larger and much cherished domain, and so it would be incorrect to characterize him in a one-dimensional way as a reprehensible deity that celebrated and encouraged theft. That, however, is more or less the impression we receive of Laverna. No doubt she had depth and nuance too, but this is lost to us. What we can say is that she wasn't a mainstream Olympian goddess, and what ancient references we have of her do throw her in with a bad lot. She seems to have origins in mainland Italy among the Etruscans, for whom she seems to have been associated with the dei inferi, the spirits of the underworld, making her, it seems, a chthonic divinity. And it's from the Etruscans that we receive our one and only extant, ancient representation of her, the so-called Lavernae Poculum, or the Cup of Laverna, and this has on the inside a depiction of the goddess in her Etruscan incarnation. So my apologies for the blurriness of this image. It's very hard to find. I tracked it down to its publication in a volume from the 1980s, from which I managed to get this scan. So it's a bit grainy, but at least now we can see her face. So may I present to you Laverna, a very ancient vision of the goddess. In it, she seems to be quite a sprightly, jovial-looking, winged little creature, carrying something on a platter, it seems. Inscriptions pop up with her name on it here and there across Italy, and she definitely had a cult centre in Rome. In fact, this cult centre was prominent and well-known enough to give its name to the city gate that was nearby it. The Porta Lavernalis in the old city walls of the ancient city stood on Rome's Aventine Hill and took its name from a nearby grove of Laverna, in which several authors tell us there was an altar to the goddess. She also had a grove on the Via Salaria, the old salt road, and it seems to be that in the Roman incarnation of the goddess and the evolution of her cult there, that she became caught up with the world of thievery and deceit. But this must have happened early in her life in the ancient capital, because we find her named several times by the Latin playwright Plautus in the 3rd century BCE, and always with reference to thieves. You might remember from the episode about the Lares, we looked at one of Plautus's plays, the Alularia, about an old man called Euclio who becomes so completely obsessed about protecting his pot of gold that he becomes paranoid, and a lot of comedic chaos ensues from his crazed suspicions that everyone is trying to steal it. It's his Lares, his household gods, he asks to help him to protect it. And at one point that we didn't consider in that earlier episode, he chases some cooks out of his house. They'd been sent to him as a gift to prepare his daughter's wedding feast, but in his madness, they fall under his suspicions too, and he ends up chasing them out of the kitchen. Being forced to abandon their equipment in the house due to Eucleo's haste to shove them out, one cook shouts back as Euclio slams the front door. He shouts, "So help me, Laverna, if you don't have my vessels brought back to me, I'll tear up your reputation with my shrill voice here, now, right in front of your house." So that's an interesting plea to Laverna, as it comes from the robbed, not the robber, and we'll come back to think about that a little more in terms of the goddess's function in a little while. Plautus's other references to Laverna confirm her connection to Thieves. We hear a fragment of another prayer to the goddess, "Mihi Laverna in furtis celerasit manus." May Laverna quicken my hands during thefts. And in a fragment of a lost play, one character says, either to a band of thieves or to a group of people he wants to insult by insinuating they are a band of thieves, "Now follow me this way, please, all you legions of Laverna. Legiones omnes Lavernae." An obscure reference by a 3rd century CE author supposedly also attests to a habit of pouring libations to Laverna with the left hand. And this adds to the fragmentary picture of her ominous and clearly long-standing alterity, as the left hand was sinister. Literally, the Latin for the left hand is sinistra, and this was the unlucky and untrustworthy side. So it would be interesting if it were true that the thieves really did offer their sacrifices and libations to their patron goddess with their bad hand. There's a recognition in the act and a concerted sort of deviance that's really telling if it was bound up in the sacral rituals to supplicate the goddess. The poet Ausonius refers to a plagiarist as a bad Laverna of good poetry, showing that even the theft of ideas might fall under the goddess's pilfering remit. And so while we might wonder what went on in her sacred grove, and what sort of a place it was, and what sort of people were going there or frequenting the altar, but unfortunately, this is about as far as the ancient evidence takes us. You might hear all sorts of other details and even mythologies about her confidently asserted and regurgitated around the internet, but these are not true, or at least they aren't ancient. Understandably, this goddess stirs people's imaginations, and accordingly a great deal has been made up about her. Probably the biggest culprit is Charles Godfrey Leland's 1899 book, Aradia, or The Gospel of the Witches, in which he purported to learn all sorts of secrets about old Italian witchcraft from a Tuscan medium named Maddalena, who supposedly gave him a pile of ancient texts. He allegedly collected and retold stories from Italian traditions, and he also published a book entitled The Unpublished Legends of Virgil, which, while a fun creative endeavour, is often mistaken for genuine historical material, and this is the source of a lot of the unhistorical details that you'll find online about Laverna. I'll not repeat them though. Our interests here are the ancient Roman worldview and what Romans themselves thought was going on. But if evidence runs out, and Laverna retreats into the darkness and disappears like a pair of looted sandals at this point, let's take another route into her domain, one that promises to shed a little more light. If we've lost the trail on the goddess, let's follow the thieves themselves instead. Because if traces of Laverna are few and far between, evidence for ancient robbers and thieves are everywhere and abundant. Once the oil lamps were lit and the streets were swallowed by the darkness of night, safety plummeted and crime rose exponentially. In inns and taverns, while the wine poured and the senses dimmed, the unsuspecting might be relieved of their unwatched possessions by stealthy hands and nimble fingers. In the streets, belongings might be snatched more aggressively by individual opportunists or street gangs operating collectively. It was said that the Emperor Nero used to disguise himself and join in on this sort of low-life activity for fun. And it doesn't do to take those ancient accounts at face value and simply believe them, because they were written by senators whose intentions were to undermine and discredit emperors that they disliked. However, what we can take from them for our purposes is the general atmosphere and behaviour at the more raucous edges of a Roman night and the world of thieves it encompasses. Suetonius says of Nero, "No sooner was twilight over than he would throw on a cap or a wig and go to the taverns or range about the streets playing pranks, which, however, were very far from harmless, for he used to beat men as they came home from dinner, stabbing any who resisted him and throwing them into the sewers. He would even break into shops and rob them, setting up a market in the palace where he divided the booty which he stole, sold it at auction, and then squandered the proceeds." Now, this wasn't without inherent dangers, of course, because the victims, unaware that it was the emperor who pounced upon them, would often fight back. In the struggle which resulted, Suetonius relates, he often ran the risk of losing his eyes or even his life. So whether or not Nero really got up to such antics, the violence inherent in such muggings was very real and often mentioned. In one satire, Juvenal describes a man called Umbricius, who is giving up life in Rome and moving to the countryside because he's so sick to death of the degradation and violence of the city. "This is the freedom accorded to the poor," he rails. "When they're beaten, knocked down by fists, they can beg and plead to be allowed to make their way home afterwards with a few teeth left. And that's not all we need to fear. There'll be no shortage of thieves to rob you when the houses are all locked up, when the shutters in front of the houses have been chained and fastened, everywhere silent. And every so often there's a vagabond with a sudden knife at work. Whenever the Pontine marshes or the Gallinarian forest and its pines are temporarily rendered safe by an armed patrol, the rogues skip from there, heading for Rome, as if to a hunting ground." So you get the sense that thieves were a constant part of the nocturnal cityscape and a permanent threat lurking in the shadows. Juvenal also paints a lurid picture of the kind of company thieves might keep among the urban rabble. While describing the degeneracy of one young Roman who ought to have known better and who ought to have spent his time more honourably serving his country, you could find him instead, Juvenal rants with palpable disgust, in taverns and bathhouse bars, where he'll be reclining, Juvenal says, next to some assassin, mingling with sailors, consorting with thieves and fugitive slaves. Down there, among executioners, sat with coffin makers or the drums now fallen silent of some priest of Kubelais. Like Juvenal, Horace paints the same picture, also satirizing the dangers and anxieties of having money in a world where you might be stripped of it at any moment by thieves. Still, a good many people misled by foolish desire say, "There's never enough. You're only what you own." What can one say to that? Let such people be wretched, since that's what they wish, like the rich Athenian miser who used to hold the voice of the crowd in contempt. They hiss at me, that crew, but once I'm home I applaud myself as I contemplate all the riches in my chests. Tantalus, thirsty, strains towards water that flees his lips. Why do you mock him? Alter a name, and the same tale is told of you, covetously sleeping on money bags piled around, forced to protect them like sacred objects and take pleasure in them as if they were only paintings. Don't you know the value of money? What end it serves? Buy bread with it, cabbages, a pint of wine, all the rest. Things where denying ourselves of them harms our essential nature. Does it give you pleasure to lie awake, half dead of fright, terrified night and day of thieves or fire or slaves who rob you of what you have and run away? I'd always wish to be the poorest of the poor when it comes to such blessings. His moralizing about money and the benefits of being poor is disingenuous, of course. Horace was a poet of the imperial circle and absolutely loaded, so he could afford to wax romantic about honest poverty. But still, the image of sleeping on your money bags reminds us that there were no banks and no insurance, so assets and the loss of them were always tangible. If you could set hands on them, they could be taken. There was also no police force to help you. There were the night watchmen, a force called the vigiles, who patrolled the streets at night, and they might help a person in trouble, but their purpose was to keep a lookout for fires, another hazard at nightfall due to all the torches and oil lamps which were the only source of light. So there wasn't any organised system of law enforcement that you could run to if in trouble. And theft wasn't a matter of criminal law either, it was a civil offence. Just as the thief in Latin was a fur, so the crime they committed was called furtum. And there were two main kinds of furtum, known as manifest and non-manifest theft, which boiled down to recognition of the thief caught red-handed. Manifest theft was an instance of certain guilt when someone was caught in the act of stealing something. Non-manifest theft, on the other hand, was more circumstantial. Someone found to be in the possession of stolen goods, for example, couldn't be proven to have stolen those goods themselves. At different periods of history, punishments varied, and as always, punishments differed according to social status. A perpetrator found guilty might variously have to pay damages, be flogged, be enslaved, or, if already a slave, be hurled off the Tarpeian rock to their death. So while the allure of theft was quick access to easy riches, the deterrent was a potentially ignominious end. And in practice, most thieves were probably difficult to ever identify or track down. So rather than seeking recompense from the authorities, many victims of theft turned to the gods for justice. While the authorities didn't know who the culprit was, the gods surely did. So a great deal of ancient curse tablets across the Roman world are preoccupied with cursing thieves. Various deities could be invoked to seek out the filching individual and bring all hell upon their heads. One place and cities that seems to have been especially prime for losing items were the changing rooms and baths. The little cubby holes where bathers could leave their clothes and items seemed to have offered easy pickings to wayward hands. Jewellery, cloaks, belts, and valuables could easily be snatched and bundled off. People sought restitution of their property from the gods, for whom they wrote curse tablets or prayers for justice, and there's a fine line between the two. In the famous baths in the city that's taken its name from them, that's the city of Bath in England, over 130 tablets have been found deposited in the sacred spring, most of them complaining about stolen property. In one famous example, the victim pleads for revenge following the theft of his bronze vessel. Beseeching the deity of the spring for justice, he asks that it be filled with the blood of the thief. Somebody else imaginatively wishes liquefaction upon the thief, demanding that the culprit becomes as liquid as water. Curse tablets like these are found across the Roman world. We find an inscribed lead curse tablet from a man called Honoratus in Uli in Gloucestershire, beseeching Mercury for help. It reads, "Honoratus, to the holy god Mercury, I complain to your divinity that I have lost 2 wheels and 4 cows and many small belongings from my house. I would ask the genius of your divinity that you do not permit health to the person who has done me wrong, nor permit him to lie, or sit, or drink, or eat, whether he is man or a woman, whether boy or girl, whether slave or free, unless he brings my property to me and gains my concord. With renewed prayers I ask your divinity that my petition may immediately be evident that I have been vindicated by your majesty." Poor Honoratus just desperately wants his wheels and cows back. Mercury, as we've seen, was also a patron deity of thieves. But just as I mentioned in the previous episode, gods who have remit over something could wield it either way, just as the goddess Trivia might aid witches and their magic, so she might also protect you from witches and their magic. It makes sense then that Mercury might both aid thieves and recover your property from them. And I wonder whether Laverna also served this dual function and whether she aided victims of theft as well as the thieves. If you remember in the play that I quoted to you a little earlier, the indignant cook who had been kicked out of the kitchen without his equipment had hurled his own curses on Euclio as he slammed the door, swearing, "So help me, Laverna," to get his belongings back. It makes sense, I think, according to the logic of other deities, that she would be double-edged in this way, and this more useful function would explain why her sacred grove and altar could be maintained at a fairly prominent location within the ancient capital, a city rife with thieves. Similarly, on the other hand, since the stakes were high, whether you got caught or whether an avenging god evoked by a curse came after you, it's easy to imagine thieves in uneasy anticipation of their crimes, seeking a divine protector for themselves. Just as we've seen other occupations worship deities devoted to particular trade, such as Fornax for the bakers, Melona for the beekeepers, and Libitina for the undertakers, so Laverna certainly served this purpose for thieves. It may seem strange to us that a deity might take care of immoral sides of life and human nature. It might seem even stranger that such a deity would not in itself be considered wicked or, in modern terms, evil. This is simply part of Roman polytheism, that the divine is everywhere and in everything, though Laverna perhaps pushes this concept further than most. Certainly the early Christian writer Prudentius, in his anti-pagan polemic, chose Laverna among a group of both Egyptian and Roman deities to hold up and ridicule as completely absurd religion. And it's quite funny in its contempt, having denounced the many forking ways of polytheism in favour of what he views as the one true path of God. He writes, "But some are ready to go by shorter crosswords and worship paltry vegetables and gardens by the Nile, daring to set leek and onion in the clouds as gods, and put garlic and mustard above the stars in the sky. For Isis and Serapis and the ape with the great tail and the crocodile are the same thing as Juno, Laverna, and Priapus. You O Nile, worship the former, you, O Tiber, adore the latter, but it's the same superstition, although the error is of a different hue. Laverna, then, in Prudentius's eyes, is, as a goddess of thieves, as ridiculous as divine leeks and mustard. Nevertheless, Christianity is, in fact, one of the only other places where I can find a god, or rather a saint, of thieves. And this is my festive tie-in, everyone, if you're watching this episode as it's first released, because it's the festive season, and that Christian divine patron of thieves is none other than Saint Nicholas. Old Father Christmas turned breaking and entering on its head somewhat by sneaking in and leaving things rather than stealing them. But the man who was later sainted lived in the 4th century and was bishop of Myra, Lycia, on the coast of modern Turkey. He became the patron saint of children, barrel makers, sailors, and thieves, and in amongst his supposed miracles is some pretty somber subtext: prostitution, kidnapping, dismemberment, and murder. But, to remain festive, the upshot is that St. Nicholas is supposed to be the redeemer of thieves, not a supporter and accomplice. He might be a refuge where thieves could repent and change their ways. Laverna, on the other hand, offered practical support: a swift hand, a veneer of piety, a veil of darkness, or if she was feeling well disposed, perhaps she might return your belongings to you. So, whether you're having a Merry Christmas, a Happy Hanukkah, or a Jolly Festivus for the rest of us, I hope you have a full belly, a happy heart, and if you're walking home at night, a bright torch and a faithful hound. I'll leave you with some excerpts from Juvenal, which may or may not be seasonal Roman wisdom, from a satire we call "Be Careful What You Wish For." In all the lands that stretch from Cadiz to the Ganges and the dawn, there are few who, free of a cloud of errors, can discern true good from a host of opposites. What indeed do we wish for or fear that is rational? How often is what we conceive so far from wrong-headed that we don't regret both the effort and the fulfillment of our desire? Whole families have been ruined by the gods' too ready compliance with their prayers. They ask for what harms them, whether in peace or war. More people are still undone by the money they gather with too much care, by a wealth that exceeds all other competing family fortunes, as vast as a whale from British waters when compared to a dolphin. Though you might only be carrying a few items of plain silver, when you set out to travel at night, you'll still be afraid of swords and sticks, panic at the shadow of a reed stirring in the moonlight, while an empty-handed traveller can whistle in the robber's face. The most popular prayer, as noted in all the temples, is for cash. May my wealth increase, may my family treasure chest hold the highest value of anyone's in the forum. So what are the vacuous, pernicious things that people ask for? Is there a point to those wax tablets? Prayers at the gods' knees? Well, that was Juvenal weighing in on the matter. But for my part, I hope you got what you wished for, and may Laverna see to it that you keep it.